Welcome to Literary Hype. I am Stephanie, your literary hype woman, and today I have an author conversation for you from someone who has written a few nonfiction books and is now branching out into fiction, but it is based on a real person and based in research, and it's a really fascinating story. So I'm talking about To Die Beautiful, which is by Buzzy Jackson. This is the story of Hannie Schaft from the Dutch resistance during World War II. It is a fascinating story and a really interesting conversation about research and history and kind of doing justice to these figures who lived in the past. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Buzzy Jackson. Welcome to Literary Hype. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Before we really get talking about the book, I do have a very curious question.
Oh, yes,
You
please.
go by Buzzy.
Yes.
Your name. Where does that come from?
Where does that come from? I know. I've actually been surprised there haven't been more questions about that. My legal name, my real name is Sarah, but my grandmother, who was a Jewish immigrant from Russia, now Ukraine, what's now Ukraine. When I was born, I was about 3 days old, and she came to visit and see me, and she called me Buzhika, which we all thought was some Yiddish word, that she just made up or something. But she explained it was actually a word that means a little burr or a thistle, like it sticks to you, and it's a term of affection for a baby. And my mom really liked it, but nobody could really say it, so they shortened it to Buzzy. And that was on day 3 of my life. So I've just really been Buzzy almost as long as I've been Sarah, but not quite as long. And so that's where it came from. And so I've just stayed with Buzzy. I actually have gone through a few phases where I was like, maybe I should be Sarah. But then there's about 20 billion Sarah Jacksons in the world. No offense to all of those lovely, lovely people out there. And I actually really like the name Sarah, but Buzzy, it just stuck. You know what I mean? So that is where it comes from. Straight from the family.
Love it. And
Yeah.
so an interesting tie into Jewish heritage and history, which is what your book is about.
Yeah.
So I'm going to introduce us to Die Beautiful.
It's about a young woman who's not Jewish, Hannie Schaft, who meets two girls who, as far as I can tell, they were the first Jewish people she really was friends with. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean they really were, but the ones she was aware of. And what's important about that is that, up until the Nazis invaded the Netherlands in 1940, most of the Jewish people in the Netherlands didn't really go out of their way to proclaim their religious identity. They were very well assimilated into society there. And in fact, it had been one of the safest places for Jews to live in Europe for hundreds of years, and so like Philine, one of the Jewish girls who's Hannie's friend, she says at one point in the book, and this is actually a direct quote from her, that she didn't even know she was Jewish until Hitler told her. And so Hannie becomes friends with these two Jewish girls right at the time when the Nazis are occupying the Netherlands, and it's essentially her friendship with them that spurs her to take action and become a member of the Dutch resistance during the war.
So Hannie is a real person who lived and did all this crazy stuff during World War II. How did you come across her story?
And so are her friends, who I just mentioned, Sonia Frank and Philine Polak. I was on vacation in Amsterdam around Christmas of 2016. And if you recall, it was a pretty fraught time for the Western world. The Brexit vote had just happened in the UK, and we had just had a big presidential election here in the United States, and Trump had just gotten elected. And I was over there just visiting friends, and we went to the Verzet's Museum, which is the Museum of Resistance. And I thought I had been to every museum in Amsterdam, but it turns out there's about 200 of them. And we went in there, and my friend said, "Oh, you should really check out this little exhibit on this woman, Hannie Schaft." And when I say little exhibit, I mean it was one little tiny window with a pair of her glasses, her pistol, and a photograph of her and Truus Overstegen. Truus was a young woman dressed as a man, and Hannie was kind of dolled up in a little cute jacket. And it just had a little explanatory note that said Hani Shaft was a young college student who joined the resistance and became an assassin of Nazis and collaborators. And I thought, what? Like, how do you do that? And so my first thought leaving the museum was, well, I'm going to go out and buy the Hani Shaft book because I got to find out about this young woman. And was really shocked to find that there wasn't one. There certainly wasn't one in English at that point. There had been some books written about Hani in Dutch over the years, but at that time in 2016, nothing more recent than nothing even in the 21st century had been written. And so I have a background as a historian, and I was kind of looking for a new project. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just write the Hani Shaft biography, in English. And I decided to start looking into that. And that was my intention, to write a nonfiction book. Probably for the first year I worked on it, just doing research. And then at a certain point, I started to realize there really wasn't enough, there wasn't a lot of direct material from Hani's life, like in the form of a journal, or like in Anne Frank's case. We know about Anne Frank because she left that beautiful diary. And Hani never left anything like that behind. So, and certainly didn't give any interviews. So my agent suggested, well, maybe you should write it as a novel, because then at least you could have some dialogue in the book, and I hadn't really thought about it that way. But I came to the conclusion that they were right. And it was a big leap for me, but I decided to just go for it and try to write it as a novel, kind of using Schindler's List as a model, just because that's a book that is a novel, but I think most of us think of it as a nonfiction account of Oskar Schindler and what happened in the Holocaust. And I thought that what Thomas Keneally, the author of that, did with Schindler's List was so powerful and still respectful to the real story that it gave me some confidence to try it myself.
So you already have 3 nonfiction books, and now you're writing your first fiction. What was the biggest challenge for you in kind of shifting into that make-believe mindset?
Yeah, I wrote what I would call 3 practice novels before this one, 3 complete novels that probably will never see the light of day. But, they really taught me how to write a novel in a sense. I think mostly there's all the challenges of writing a novel, but then there's also this feeling of responsibility that I had to the real people involved, because in the finished book, I would, almost every single character is based on a real person and actually has that person's name, except for like 2 or 3 who are more of composite characters. And I just decided that I was going to stay as close to the facts of the story as far as, we're able to know them, and then only really try to elaborate on the stuff that like there's no way anybody could know. So that's like, intimate conversations between people, and even those I tried to base on some of the memoirs of the people involved and the kinds of things they talked about with each other. But I think mostly the most challenging thing about it was just this feeling of responsibility to get it, right. And I was very fortunate to interview some people who had lived through the war, but also descendants of some of the family members involved in this, in the book. Like, for instance, the Overstegens descendants, Truus and Ferretti's descendants, and also the daughter of Philine, who's one of the Jewish girls who Hani helped. And I'm incredibly relieved to say that they were very supportive of the book, but also they've read the final book and they're really happy with the final book. So to me, it's nice to get good reviews and everything, but honestly, like, waiting to hear what they thought of the book was one of the scariest moments of my life. And fortunately, they really love it and are happy it's out there. Philine's daughter said she's just glad that more people will know this story, because her own mother didn't really talk about it much during her life, just because it was so painful, so she's just happy that more people will know about what happened.
So Philine and one other person were still alive when you were starting this process of writing this book. Did you get to talk to them at all in person?
Unfortunately, Philine was, she was alive, but she just she was in sort of failing health. She's in her 90s, and she passed away about a year and a half after I started working on the book. But I had already made contact with her family by that point. So, and it, you know, it was good to know that like they were supportive of it from the beginning. And then I talked to Truce's daughter a lot, and she's amazing and lives in France now, but she was really helpful, shared like family photographs with me. And it's just kind of startling when you've done a lot of research and then you go meet these people and it's like, oh, these are real people, they're real. This is the way I think of my mom, that's how she thinks of her mom, and it's like, as a historian, it was very moving to me to actually have this connection to history in that very personal way. It was a little overwhelming. I had my moments where I was like, am I capable of doing this? But, fortunately, the pandemic came along and I had nothing else to do. So I had to do, no, I'm just kidding. But I have been working on this book for 7 years, and the pandemic, I worked on it a lot during the pandemic, obviously. And it was kind of like, well, whatever happens with this pandemic, whatever happens with this book, I'm just going to keep doing it. And hopefully someone will read it at the end, so it's really thrilling at this point that people actually are. It's great.
A project of this magnitude involves so much research. What did that look like for you and your process?
Well, I think my background as a historian made me feel, gave me the initial confidence to even take this on in the first place. And I took it on as I take on a lot of book projects, which they don't all work out. But you kind of start it and you sort of assess, okay, what's out there? Like what kind of material is still out there? Who's around that I could talk to about this, if anybody? And it involved, for me, I did about 3 research trips to the Netherlands and one to the UK as well, to the National Archives there. Just because that was actually really fascinating, because they had sort of the other side of the resistance story, which is to say the Royal Air Force was receiving this intelligence that was gathered by people like Hani on the ground in the Netherlands to try to do their air raids and bombing missions in the Netherlands on like U-boat facilities, that kind of thing. So it was really rewarding after doing a bunch of research in the Netherlands to then go to the UK and see these memos from British officers saying, well, we just picked up, this map of this place, and knowing that people like Hani had produced that stuff. But yeah, I interviewed survivors of the war. I interviewed historians who work on this stuff, Dutch historians who are like the real experts in the sort of Dutch Holocaust. And then I just did a bunch of broader research just on the history of World War II and the Nazi Germany and that whole thing. And that was great for me, because World War II was not my area of expertise per se when I started this. But as you know, as a person who reads historical fiction, there's a lot of books out there about it. And I will say one thing that I intentionally decided is that I was not going to read any of the big books about World War II that have been popular recently, like The Nightingale and Of Light We Cannot See. I mean, I wanted to read them because people said they were great, but I was like, I'm just afraid I'll be influenced by them, or I'll be intimidated by them, or whatever, it'll get in my head, so I just didn't let myself read any of those books. I still haven't. And I think that was helpful for me, just psychologically, to be like, I'm just writing my book, other people can write their books, and hopefully hopefully they're each saying something different, and a different little corner of this crazy story.
You just touched on it. Let's just go there.
Sure.
There are so many historical fiction, World War II. It is a big chunk of the market right now. What is it about your book that you think will make it stand out amongst the crowd?
Yeah. I do think that one of the things that it makes it stand out is that it is based on a true story. And although it is a fictionalized version of that story, it's not an exaggerated version of that story. So many times when I was writing it, I would be looking at the actual, materials of like what we know happened. And I think, It is a good thing I'm saying that this is based on a true story, because nobody would believe it if I just wrote it as a novel, because some of the crazy things that happen, I mean, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but some of the things that Hani says at the end of the book are so unbelievable, but they're actually historically documented. So I do think that readers who like World War II books or like war books and are looking for something a little bit different, I think this is a nice way to like really understand the history of a place that is, but it's just in a fictionalized format. You know what I'm saying? And I feel really confident and I feel good as a historian about where this novel came out, that there's not a bunch of invented stuff in there. There's invented dialogue, and that's about it, and I think it's a nice thing for readers to kind of be able to step back and feel like, oh, I really learned something here, hopefully they feel like that after they read it.
I did try to Google a picture of her while I was reading it, and like the first thing that popped up was like a massive spoiler, because I'd never heard of it before. And I was just like, well,
I know.
no,
I know. It's so tough. It's so tough because exactly. It's hard to avoid it. I mean, it's kind of the good and bad thing about writing about her, because she is well known in the Netherlands, but that's pretty much the only place that she's well known. Yet there do exist Wikipedia pages and lots of, news items and stuff over the years. And I will say, in a really nice way, since the time I began writing this in 2016, her profile and the profile of a lot of the other Dutch resistance heroes has really risen even before I published my book. And I think part of that is because this generation of people is passing away now, and some of their obituaries have come out. And every time one of their obituaries comes out, there's renewed interest in like, who are these amazing women and men? But I'm talking mostly about the women here. And that's been a really cool thing to see, is like there's sort of growing awareness. And there's actually a few more books now, nonfiction books about Hani that didn't exist when I first started this book. So my hope is that my book and these other books just bring these women to the attention that they really deserve. I mean, I believe that Hani is one of the great overlooked heroes of World War II. So hopefully people will start to know about her more.
And what does it mean to you to be able to tell this story of such a strong woman? Like Kate Quinn writes a lot of actual women from World War II. Mm-hmm. Marie Benedict has a couple. To be part of that group pushing women's stories that weren't well known back in the day to the forefront, what does that mean to you?
I think we're fortunate to be living in a time when women's history is really exploding. And that's mostly because women historians and writers, in the late 20th century started making that a priority, to the point where now we're not surprised to see a book that's about, a woman assassin or a woman, who did all of these other incredible heroic things. It's just a good example of how the more sort of diverse stories you have out there, whether it's gender diversity or racial or anything else, that's how you get the complete picture of what happened. It's not, we're never going to get it if we just get the men's side of the story. And as I discovered doing the research for this book, a lot of the work that the women did in the resistance, even though there were a lot fewer of them in the Dutch resistance, they often did some of the most dangerous jobs. And that was because they were so, wildly underestimated by the Germans and everyone around them, who would never suspect that they were carrying, a bazooka in their bicycle basket, which they often were, or, transporting weapons or placing bombs in movie theaters and stuff like that. They just escaped suspicion. And that was a way that women sort of used sexism in their favor. That was how Hani got so close to the people that she assassinated, because they never saw her coming, and so I think that those stories, telling them now, helps us realize what a huge role women always play in all of history, and certainly in these like exceptional times.
book is so beautifully written, and like the detail and description just really pop off. Like the one that sticks out the most to me is describing a winding banister like calligraphy. It really paints a picture for you. What was it like for you to put that effort into finding those details when it's something you can't see or experience entirely of how it was back then, but trying to put it into the page now?
Yeah, I mean, that part was pretty intimidating for me, just as a person who really wrote nonfiction mostly before this. But I read a ton of fiction, and I was an English major, so I love books and novels and poetry. And I think it was a challenge to just have really kind of have the confidence to just try it, to use more metaphors and just poetic language that I might not use if I was writing a biography, a straight ahead nonfiction biography, but it really called for it, I felt. And I also just, I spent a lot of time in the Netherlands, and all of my descriptions of the place, I have to say, one of the nice things, one of the ironic things is that most of the Netherlands, aside from the city of Rotterdam, most of the Netherlands survived the war pretty much intact physically. It wasn't, bombed like Dresden and things like that. So you can walk around these places today, and many of them look more or less like they did in 1943. And so, if you've ever been to or seen those photos of those amazing canal houses in Amsterdam, they're so beautiful, they're so striking. I thought, well, this is your opportunity to really write about them and bring them to life, because this is what they looked like back then too, So I tried to just use a lot of visual reference photos and that kind of thing, and my own photos that I took on my travels there, and just kind of went for it of like, this is how it looks. And I should say, I had the help of a really wonderful Dutch historian and writer, Esther Shaya, who's credited in the acknowledgements. I did ask her, when I was done with the manuscript, to just proofread the entire manuscript from a Dutch perspective. Like, what am I getting really wrong? Am I using some phrase wrong? Or am I describing something in a way that doesn't make sense? And that, once she read it and gave me her feedback, that gave me so much more confidence in putting this book out in the world, because I'm not Dutch and I don't speak Dutch. So I tried to be as accurate as possible, to the extent that I could.
And there is a lot of Dutch and German in this book, and that's like translated. I've studied German, so it was real fun for me to try to figure it out before I got to the translation. What was the decision process like in deciding to put different languages into this story?
Yeah, I should say I also had another writer, Drea Knufkin, who speaks German fluently, whose parents are German, to read all the German stuff to make sure I got that right. And I definitely had gotten some stuff wrong there. I think I just felt like, especially being an American and being a person who doesn't speak the language, I wanted to have a bit of something. I wanted there to be some language in there that English speakers, for example, would come across and recognize, okay, this is a foreign language, but not so much that it would stop them in their tracks, but that it would just remind them, like, that's what language this is happening in. And also, I wanted to include both Dutch and German, because the relationship between the Dutch and the German was such a big part of the book. And the Germans wanted to believe that the Dutch would just happily switch sides and become part of the German people when they invaded. That didn't happen. But it was important to the Dutch, and it still is to this day, for everybody to know that Dutch and German are not the same language, that they're not the same culture. And Hani spoke German, which was a big part of why she was able to be successful, is because she spoke such fluent German and could sort of pass herself off as a German woman or a Swiss woman, And so I liked having that in there, just to remind the reader and myself as I was writing it, that like the Dutch were encountering a foreign population too, and there's times in the book where Hani insists on speaking either Dutch or German to a German person, depending on what her objective is in that interaction, and So I wanted the reader to be able to sort of be in that mindset with her.
One of my personal favorite parts of the story is that Hani is a redhead.
Yes, she is beautiful red hair. Yes.
Um, there's so many like little redheaded comments throughout this book that ring so true.
Oh, good.
Her rock sighting, like as a kid
Yeah.
trying that, like
Right.
called crazy because she's a redhead.
Right.
How did you get into the mindset of a redhead when that's not your hair color?
That's right. I am a natural blonde, like a lot of people in the Netherlands. It was funny because as I researched the book, people really had always made a big deal about her red hair. She had an older sister who had the classic Dutch coloring of blonde hair and blue eyes. And so I think when little Hani popped out as this redhead, it was like something that set her apart from even her family from the very beginning. And because she grew up as a shy, kind of introverted person when she was a girl, um, I get the sense that her hair color sort of just reinforced that for her, that she was somehow, a little bit different. And it's possible that that even, helped her understand her Jewish friends, who were, of course, both brunettes and had more classically sort of Jewish coloring, um, helped her relate to them a little bit as like a bit of an outsider, and yet also her hair became, I think, for her kind of a um battle flag of sorts, that she really embraced it. And as I tried to show in the book, I think that when she joined the resistance, part of that was just embracing all the parts of herself that she had kind of kept quiet for so long, and that included her red hair. Now obviously it became so well known, even by Hitler, that she had to try to disguise it at a certain point, and I won't give anything away, but it's like the color of her hair is very important as the book goes on, and all of those aspects of it are true. Like that is what happened. And again, without any spoilers, I'll just say that like it was very important that she tried to keep her hair color covered at a certain point. um, and to me, that also just tied in with another big theme of her life and of the book, I think, which is that really embracing a lot of the feminine aspects, or classically coded feminine aspects, like beauty and hairstyles and makeup and fashion and all these things. I really think she used all of those things and kind of weaponized them for her own power. And her hair was the most obvious example of that, but I think also it was true of just how she began to see herself as more of a kind of femme fatale, as the war went on.
I just loved it. Like embrace because it's like so many people refer to me, oh, the redhead. So to see that in a whole different context of what that could mean to someone was really interesting for me personally. The emotional toll of writing something so heavy. How did you take care of yourself while writing this?
Yeah, that's a really perceptive question. It's funny because when I first showed this book to my mom, when I, at a certain point when it was mostly done, she was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you've been working on this like such a heavy book during the pandemic. Like, how did you do it?" And I realized to some degree I had kind of become desensitized, because you sort of have to, because I'm just reading about horrible Nazis all the time. But I also, I tried to weave in the book, there's sort of very, very dark parts and then some lighter parts of like that are mostly have to do with reconnection with other people, and stay human idea. But I will tell you, I definitely had moments where I would be writing a scene, referring to my notes of how to, what happened, and it would be some, upsetting scene with German soldiers or whatever. And I one time I had on my phone to the side, and I just put on the Pixar movie Toy Story just in the background with no sound, so that I could every once in a while just look over and go, "Oh yeah, like beauty and friendship exist, and like cute little children exist," and just to kind of bring me back to like all of the world is not like this, just get through this scene. But I also felt a real responsibility to describe the true pain and horror of the experience as far as I could imagine it, you know? So I'm a pretty sunny, optimistic person in my real life. And I do sometimes look back at this book and flip through it, you know, and I'll go, oh, wow. I remember how hard that was writing that, you know, but again, I think the historian in me felt like it was really important to get those parts in there. A lot of stuff got cut out, I will say that.
What's
Too
like
hard.
the most interesting thing that got cut out for you?
I mean, there's so much about Hani's story that could never fit in a book, and I talk about some of it at the end of the book. One of the things she did was there's a little more sort of on the ground espionage that she did that involved sneaking onto sort of military bases in the Netherlands and creating maps, drawing maps of essentially what were U-boat, submarine. They were submarine sort of facilities where they built submarines, and also launch sites for V2 rockets that were launched at England successfully many times, and also during the Blitz. And she was really instrumental in sort of trying to map out those places on the coastline so that the RAF, the Royal Air Force, could come and bomb them, which they did successfully, some of those. So that was a whole part where, you know, I just thought this book is already so long, I can't include it. And I have to say, one thing that I didn't get space to put in there was a little sort of brief period of a few weeks where Hani, and no spoilers, but the guy she's involved with in the book got to actually like take a few weeks away and just decompress for a little bit. And I don't know exactly what happened, but I wrote like an entire chapter about this lovely little romantic getaway they had, and then ultimately cut it because the book was too long and it was mostly speculation, you know, about what they did. So I felt like it was okay to cut it, but definitely was hard for me because I felt like I so wanted them to have, you know, just to get a break. My gosh, you know, after everything. So the good news is they actually did get a break. It's just not depicted in the book.
The relationship with Hani and the man she's interested in, like there's so much depth to that because he has something else going on and all that. What was it like putting this relationship on the page that's really just formed out of trauma, like love and trauma together?
Their relationship is I mean, it's so interesting because it's happening in this crazy situation of they're both, you know, they're both under a lot of pressure, a lot of danger. But you know, the thing I tried to keep in mind was that this was the first romance she ever had. You know, this was the first person she was ever really involved with. Seriously, I'm sure she had crushes before or whatever. And so to me, their relationship was a little bit of like, what I imagined that it was a bit of a respite for her of like something beautiful in the midst of all of this horror, you know. And I do think that, you know, if you've ever been in a relationship and had that new relationship energy, it can kind of do anything. Like, so I feel like even in the midst, it seemed very believable to me that even in the midst of all of this, and maybe because they were in the midst of all of this, they could have this incredibly intense and a lot of beautiful moments together, despite everything. And I actually met a historian in the Netherlands, a Dutch guy who is writing the biography of Jan Bonnekamp, and who's, let's just say it, he's the person we're talking about. And I did run some of this by him, you know, like, well, what do you think about this? You know, and he basically, I told him where I was coming from and what I thought, and he was okay with it, you know, in terms of what he knew about Jan's life. I thought it was just such an important part of the story because to me, this book is, of course, is about like the terrible things that happen in war, but it's also about the really beautiful connections between people during war. So her relationship with him, but also with the Oversteegen sisters and with her friends, you can form such deep bonds with people in the midst of trauma that that part of it seemed like I definitely wanted to spend a lot of time on that part too, because that's the beautiful part, you know.
And you're doing something really cool that I saw on your website, that you are offering little visits to virtual book clubs.
Yes, would love to, if you have a book club and want to read To Die Beautiful in your book club, I would be happy to Zoom in and chat with you about it. You know, I'm in a book club too. I'm also in a writing group, and I know how fun it is to talk about this stuff, and it can be fun. I think, especially with a book that's based on so much researched history, to kind of get a chance to talk to the author about like what's real and what's not, and like sort of what happened to these people after the war, all those questions. There's not room to do all of that in the book. So if anybody is interested in that, they can just head to my website, buzzyjackson.com. And there's just a dedicated page on there for book clubs. And you can just get in touch with me, and we can do it anywhere in the world, really. I'm going to be meeting with book clubs in Boston and California and the UK. So it's, you know, it's a brave new world. We can meet anywhere now. So yeah, thanks for mentioning it, because I really enjoy doing that.
The pandemic has really opened up author interactions in such a beautiful and fun way. Like,
Yeah.
this channel wouldn't be functional as it is without the pandemic kind of opening up Zoom
Yes.
like it did.
Yes.
So it's really cool to see authors out there putting themselves out there to meet with readers in that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's such a gift after working on a book by yourself for so long to actually get to talk to people about it. I mean, it's a real honor for me. So I really enjoy it.
Is there anything else that I missed that you want to talk about?
I mean, I think the only other thing I would say is it has been optioned for film/TV. So keep your eyes out. There's nothing coming out right away or anything, but I'm really hoping, you know, from the very beginning, I felt like, oh my God, this makes such a great movie or series or something. And so I'm hoping that that something will come of that, because it's like so perfect for it. And mostly I just think it would be nice just to get her story out there as widely as possible.
What are you working on next?
Well, I'm working on a novel that is once again historical fiction, and it is based on this one is set in the United States in the early 1960s, and it's based on a true crime that happened in the US. And I'm sort of describing it to my agent as Nancy Drew meets In Cold Blood. So it's got a lot of the action and violence and drama, but also a plucky female heroine at the center of it. And it's been great to work on. It's fun to work with sources that are in a language I speak. That's really exciting. And I'm excited about it. I think anybody who reads To Die Beautiful will really enjoy this one once it's done. It's not done yet, but it's getting there.
And because this is literary hype, what books are you hyped about right now?
I just read the 2 new Cormac McCarthy books. And I love Cormac McCarthy. They're, like all of his books, fairly challenging, but really, really great. One is called The Passenger and one is called Stella Maris. And they're really a fascinating pairing of 2 very different books that support the same story. It's pretty audacious. I think you can only be Cormac McCarthy to have the clout to publish 2 books in the same season that support each other. But that's been great. And then I've also been reading a nonfiction book completely unrelated to any of this, which I do need to do from time to time. And that's the book Cameraman by Dana Stevens. And it's a history of Buster Keaton, the silent film star. And I just love Buster Keaton. And all of his movies are available for free on YouTube. And anybody out there who hasn't seen Buster Keaton, get out there, because he was genius. So that's just been really a fun thing to do. It's a really good book, and it's also tells you a little bit about the history of like the turn of the century, like the early 20th century. It's fascinating, the early film industry. There were so many women film directors when Hollywood first started out. It's stunning. There's a lot you can learn from it, but also just a fun book.
Awesome. Sounds so good. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your book, To Die Beautiful. It's so good. So good.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And, you know, and just for doing this and supporting writers, it makes such a big difference. And it's great to talk to a redhead about this book, I gotta say. Go Redheads.
Power.
That's right. That's right. This one's for you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks again to Buzzy for hanging out with me and talking about her book, To Die Beautiful. If you're interested in getting a copy of this book, those links are down below, as well as where to find her on social media and how to get her to appear at your virtual book club meeting. Definitely something you should check out, especially if you're into World War II fiction. This book is so fantastic, and she definitely brings a wealth of knowledge to the table to discuss this book. So definitely check that out. And don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, share it with your friends, all the things that you hear every YouTuber talk about, because it really does help and it matters. So thank you so much for being with me today and hanging out. Until next time, I'll see you later.